Okay, so our last talk before the panel session is from three guys from the FT. I'll let them introduce themselves, and they're going to be talking about the war reporting, or specifically data-driven war reporting. So, over to you guys.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Considering it's a free bar, we thought that might be the end of it, but you have all come back, which is good. I'm Sam. I'm the editor of the visual storytelling team at the FT, and this is Alex and Dan, who work in the team with me. And yeah, today we're going to talk you through a specific project which kind of focused on using data to do some reporting in Ukraine and sending one of our reporters there to do that. That is this piece, which we'll talk through. Rebuilding one street in Ukraine. It is exactly what it says on the tin. And we kind of used data to create this visual story which kind of showed readers why and the impact, of Russia's war and kind of how scarring it's been, and kind of really hit home the enormous task that the reconstruction will involve. But before I talk to you about this project, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about visual storytelling at the FT. We started, well, the team was formed last July, so we're kind of just over a year old, coming up to a year and a half. And yeah, I thought it'd just be useful to kind of outline what we do and how we do it. So I stole this graphic from the FT Weekend magazine editor, who gave a presentation to the newsroom a little while ago. And he kind of talked about why magazine journalism doesn't follow the traditional kind of inverted pyramid news story structure. So that little chart on the right, I would have changed the fonts, to be honest, because they're not as legible as I would have liked them to be. But effectively, a normal news story has the most important bit at the start, and then it kind of goes through and the least interesting bits at the end. And for the magazine, if you want to write a cover story for the magazine, it's more about creating a kind of narrative. And they always have a character that drives the story, and you kind of build through that to a crescendo, and that kind of character really guides it. And that could be a company, an individual, but that's, or if you read the FT magazine on the weekend, that is what they have in it. That lead story always has a sort of central narrative, and it gives you a really nice way of thinking about what you're doing. And it got me thinking, in effect, we are a digital magazine desk as a visual storytelling team, but instead of a character driving the story, it's all about the visuals. So can we think of a kind of key visual that drives the narrative and unites it and carries the story the whole way through? And I get, a nice way of thinking about it is it's almost like what you'd whiteboard out. If you kind of got your pens out and explained something to people in stages, that's kind of what we're doing. And it's deconstructing stories and using the visuals to kind of drive that narrative. And that takes loads of different forms, but the two types of storytelling that we do are using stories or creating stories that use visual evidence to break new ground and kind of reveal something new. So that might be an investigation where we kind of show you the documents, or we kind of show you the satellite imagery that does that. The other kind of story we do is explaining the biggest topics of the moment in visually compelling ways. And the best stories combine both of those things. So that's what we're really trying to do as a team. That's the kind of key thing that we're trying to achieve. And it means that our stories take loads of different forms. So in June, we published this piece that was about the threat that space debris poses to life on Earth, and that opened by rocketing readers into low Earth orbit, placing them in a kind of cloud of space debris, and kind of scrolled you through from there. Just recently, we looked ahead to the Party Congress in China, and we had a story about how Xi Jinping has become China's unrivaled leader. And for that, the story was united by sort of little pen pictures of the almost all-male, very old standing committee. And that was the kind of basis for that. So we kind of pick a visual that then drives that story through, and that's what we're trying to do. Naturally, we've done lots of reporting on Ukraine. It was kind of a big moment for everybody, but at the start of this year, it became what we're going to work on, and then very quickly the answer was Ukraine, and that's what we focused on. And early this year, in May, we kind of started thinking about how we could contextualize the impact of the war and the cost it's had to ordinary people. So we know that rebuilding Ukraine will be immensely costly and complex, and it's going to run into hundreds of billions, the actual cost of rebuilding the country. So we wanted to kind of explain and contextualize that 350 billion cost of rebuilding the country in a relatable way. But how do you quantify that damage done and make it relatable to readers? Our kind of one of our correspondents, Ben Hall, went out to Ukraine just as we were having this idea, and did what we can't do, which is write a story very quickly, which kind of looked at the big picture numbers and kind of got it into it that way. But we wanted to break down that bankrupting cost and really explain it to readers and kind of get into the communities and the damage done. And a kind of traditional way of doing that as a kind of visual and data team is charts and maps. That's what we're very good at. And this is these are two of the charts that went into that story. They kind of show you the impact across the country and where that kind of breaks down. But we wanted to do it in a kind of more personal way, because the war in Ukraine is more than a data story. We know that. It's about photographs. It's about open source intelligence. It's that kind of really hitting home the infrastructure costs. And that's what we did with this story. So we had an ideas meeting at that time, like what can we do to kind of tell the story? And Alex said, why don't we just focus on one street? Why don't we just really zero in on one road and look at the damage done there? Because that kind of hits home the impact of the war and how it's affected ordinary people. So that was the idea. That's what we started with. And we thought, how do we kind of build that out? And the next challenge was, how do you find one street when there are so many that have been hurt and damaged? So I'll pass over to Alex to explain how we did that.
Thank you. Yeah, so my role on the team is kind of being a reporter, and a lot of what went into finding the street and that we wanted to focus on did just involve quite traditional reporting techniques and a bit of modern kind of stuff using open source intelligence, or OSINT, which is the kind of thing that Bellingcat do, if you know about them. So it involved a lot of trawling for material, and that started with me. I basically kind of was looking online for kind of sources that we might be able to use, and I came across some maps that had been published by UNITAR, which is the UN's they have a satellite agency that tracks damage in conflict zones, and they had been making these maps for lots of different cities in Ukraine, and the different colours are the different level of damage to different buildings. And so I had a call with them, and I said, what are some good areas to focus on? And they said, they gave me kind of 3 different names of different kind of towns, and one of them was Irpin, which is a suburb of Kyiv. And then from there, we have a relationship with Planet, who are a satellite imagery. They have a satellite, don't they? Or they kind of a subscription service to really high definition satellite imagery. And I asked them for satellites from before and after the invasion of the different towns that the UN had directed me to, and they sent me these massive images. And then I basically had to spend hours just kind of trawling around the images, literally really zoomed in with them on a massive screen, looking for streets that had a lot of damaged buildings on them. And so I kind of came up with like a short list of potential streets from doing that. And this is just to show you the difference. So this was the before image of the street that we ended up focusing on, called Soborna Street in Irpin, this suburb of Kyiv. And you can see this long, thin building running down the middle. And then this was it after. There was a massive battle outside of it because Bucha, is it pronounced Bucha, where there was kind of those civilian casualties, was just north of it across the bridge. Anyway, and there was a massive battle between Ukrainian and Russian soldiers right there. And you can see like the kind of craters in the roof, and the back part of the building is the roof is completely blown off. And like lots of other buildings on the street are completely missing roofs where they've been bombed or attacked in some way. So this was basically literally just visually looking. It was literally visual reporting just to find the street. And then once I had a few of those, I wanted to make sure that it was going to work on Google Street View. So we wanted to be able to show before images of the street, what it was like for residents living there. And so we needed something that had some really good before imagery on Google Street View from before the invasion. This is that long, thin building with the craters in the roof is this mall, or was this mall. And it was called the Giraffe Mall. It had a bowling alley, a cinema, a supermarket. It was exactly the kind of place that any of us could imagine going to when we were kids with our parents or with our own kids or anything. And it was just really powerful because it was something that FT readers and anybody else in the UK could really relate to. So it really had its own story. So that was it before, and we showed this imagery in the story. That's what it looks like now, which is devastating. So yeah, that was basically how we found the street. And I'll pass back to Sam.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so we'd located our street, and it was kind of a leafy suburb. That's what we're aiming for. And then we needed to send a reporter there. So Max Seddon is this guy. He's our Moscow bureau chief. He was in Ukraine. He's done loads of fantastic reporting for us. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should. So we kind of spoke to him and said, when you go to Ukraine next, then you'll kind of stint, and we rotate reporters in and out of Ukraine because it obviously takes a heavy toll. Will you go to Irpin? Will you speak to residents who live there? And you kind of build up a picture of life before. So we kind of drive that through the story. What we didn't tell him was that we wanted to fly a drone over his head. When he agreed to go, I then rang him. It was a slightly interesting conversation saying, I know it's a war zone, but can we fly this drone? Do you mind? And he didn't mind. And then we just kept asking, and nobody said no. So we got a Ukrainian drone pilot to go there, and he took the photographs for us. And we really wanted to kind of capture that view of this street. And we thought a drone would be a great way to do it. And to be honest, the content we got back just kind of really blew our minds. It was fantastic. So these are some of the photographs that were sent through. We spoke to some of the residents in the street, and they kind of talked us through how their lives had been completely upturned. This is the House of Culture, which was kind of incredible building that had been really damaged. And it kind of really built the story from here. And it was data-driven war reporting in the sense that we knew to send him there because of that. But we also just asked Max to file. So as well as telling him we're going to fly a drone over his head, I then told him not to write a story, just to write the interviews up in full. And then when he sent them back, we would work out based on the imagery what story we wanted to tell, because we needed to see it all as a complete picture. So I told him also not to do his job and write a story, just to write interviews for us, as well as fly a drone over his head, which he was fine with, because I think he trusted us to kind of tell the best story. But yeah, these are the photographs we got back. And then I was just going to show you this video as well, because it kind of captures the drone footage really well. Hopefully you can see that full screen, yeah. But yeah, so this is Soborna Street. This is the House of Culture, the football pitch in the background. He managed to fly a drone into the building, up the stair. Like, he was just incredible how good this guy was at doing this stuff. But it kind of really, like, you can see how these visuals then drive this story. We could have written this as we could have just written this with photographs in it, but it becomes so much more powerful when you see the residents we're talking about, and you kind of build the picture up from there. And the next thing for us was, hang on, let me just see if I can still click through. There we go. Was turning this into a kind of visual narrative, and I'll pass over to Dan to explain how we did that.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first part with a lot of our visual stories is that how do I do this? There we go. So yeah, what we do with a lot of our visual stories is that we get all of the content we have and all of our ideas, and we'll get them into a Figma board. For those of you that haven't used it, Figma is kind of like Google Sheets for design, and it's really great. It's really collaborative, and we find it super useful because it can be designers, developers, reporters, etc., and everyone can just add comments in. And yeah, that's kind of how we started fleshing out the narrative. We knew we kind of wanted to do it in a chaptered way, and this just really helped us get everything onto the page and start thinking about it in a visual way. And as Sam mentioned for this piece, we just had such an amazing array of images and videos that the main challenge for us was figuring out how to kind of make those the focal point. So we started having to think about what websites and apps do this particularly well, and the first one we discussed in detail was TikTok. Now, I'm not sure how many FT readers use TikTok a lot, but I really like the way that they lay out their content. It's super engaging, it's really easy to use, and it's kind of very obvious where you should be looking as you scroll through. We also held a team ideas session at this time titled Anything But Scrolly, where we were just trying to think of different formats and ways to tell stories. We also kind of felt like for this, because we had a lot of standalone media, the kind of traditional scrolly telling way of telling stories probably wouldn't work. A lot of the images, there was no obvious way of transitioning between the two. And one piece that we got a lot of inspiration from was this from the New York Times Weekender, which is from their magazine, and it's kind of the best articles they have over the weekend. So it's really easy to use. You can use the menu on the left-hand side, or you can just scroll through stories on the right-hand side. And what we ended up with was kind of what we were describing at the time as a TikTok-style way of navigating through the story, whereby you can swipe on your phone or you can tab on your computer, and it will take you to the next part of the story, and the captions will appear over the top of it. we kind of just felt like this was the best way to tell the story. It treated each piece of media as its own standalone thing, and also gave it the precedence of making it full screen. And this is a bit of a nerd flex, but some of the CSS code to do this, no one really cares, but you have a container div and you set that scroll to snap type, so you can either set it to be X or Y. So obviously, in this case, we wanted it to be Y because it was up and down. But the reason why I included this is because on the scroll section itself, you can set a property called scroll, snap, stop, and always. And that just means that if readers were trying to scroll particularly fast, they wouldn't skip by numerous kind of slides. And that was important to us because we still wanted people to consume it in the normal kind of chronological way. So that was the first part of the story. For the second part of the story, we had a kind of a vision early on of having this kind of zoom and out section that was going to start really zoomed in on the kind of areas that we've been talking about, and then take you further out into Irpin, to Kiev, and to Ukraine, and to kind of contextualize the 300 billions worth of damage that Sam mentioned at the start. And this was a really iterative process. So at the start, we thought maybe we'll just do it as a video and include it like we have on the other cards. But what we really wanted was to let readers kind of zoom out and be in control of that zoom as they scrolled. And we used a third-party mapping tool for this called Mapbox. We've used Mapbox quite a lot before, so we managed to get a version of this set up relatively quickly. But then we came across a bug. And that bug was, so the way Mapbox works is when you go to a particular location, it's going to load in the satellite imagery for that location in chunks. So maybe it will load a 3x3 grid and it will stitch those together and that will work fine. But the problem we had for this is when we were zooming out, the outer edges weren't loaded in, only the middle was. And so we kind of got this kind of loading in effect at the side. It was kind of like if anyone's played old video games and when you get to the edge of the map and you can see it kind of buffering in the background. So, I mean, it worked fine, but it was kind of annoying. And so what we did to kind of combat this was we pre-rendered a bunch of zooms that we knew we were going to need, and we kind of effectively collaged those one over the other. So as you were zooming out, say you got to zoom 2, the first thing that we would load was the zoom 2 image, and you would see that, and then the satellite imagery, the sharper images would load on top. And this kind of effect worked really nicely, so I think we'll probably use this again in the future if we're doing something similar. And yeah, this is how it looked on mobile. And I kind of just wanted to end with the impact and the feedback we got from the piece. So on a normal long read on the FT site, the kind of amount of readers that get to the end is about 1 in 4, so about 25%. For this piece, it was actually 37%, and we were really pleased with that figure because it wasn't a particularly short piece. I think there was maybe 26 or 27 slides, and then the Mapbox section at the end. So we were really happy with that, and kind of off the back of that, we've planned now to kind of turn it into more of a template and one that we can use again in the future. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to end with some of the feedback we got from the comments, which were really pleasing to us because they were not only praising the story and kind of praising Ukraine, but they were also praising the visual storytelling and the way that we told the story. So I think that's everything from us, but if anyone has any questions, please happy to answer.